TF Wire presents War Stories, a fan fiction podcast.
Hello everyone, and welcome to another edition of TF Wire's War Stories, Episode 6. I am your host, Steven/Megatron. Today I'll be reading a story from Jakeman. The title of the story is called Games of Honor and Deception. Prologue. The battlefield was fierce, and the smell of open spark cores stunk up the air. Then suddenly an explosion caused the vision of each soldier to be blurred. Both sides were now separated only by sight. The smoke was clearing slowly, as all the electrical senses of Optimus Prime were blocked. Prime drew out his ion blaster and short-round laser gun. He made sure that he was not taken by surprise in his weakened state. He edged back to what he thought was solid rock, from what his optical sensors viewed before the explosion. His senses had fooled him. There was no wall. Prime fell down a deep trench. As he fell, he could hear the sound of laser fire and laughter. He had found himself right near the Decepticon forces. Prime picked himself up. He felt something near him. He got his laser gun ready, spun around, and took aim. He tried to view his surroundings, but could not see beyond the clouds of dust and smoke. "Prime, it's me, Magnus," said a voice. The smoke cleared near them. It was indeed Ultra Magnus. "Magnus, thank goodness. I'm afraid, old friend, we might be in trouble," replied Prime. The two Autobots stood back to back. The Decepticons finally noticed they had two of the most important Autobots in the Autobot ranks. Megatron ordered the Seekers to take aim. "Hey, Prime, still got your ion blaster?" asked Ultra Magnus quietly. "Yes, you were always the crack shot with it," joked Optimus. "Just like on Praxis, right?" replied Ultra Magnus. The Seekers flew down and were ready to fire. Then Prime and Magnus threw themselves to the ground. Prime threw his ion blaster at Magnus, and Magnus threw his short-round laser gun. They both rolled over in symmetry and blasted three of the Seekers. They both then jumped up to climb up the trench. Two more Seekers flew down to Prime and Magnus. Prime turned around and blasted both of them. But by turning around, Prime slipped and fell down the trench again. Magnus went to grab Prime's hand, but then another explosion caused Magnus to be thrown out of the trench and into the air. Magnus smacked against the ground. He felt his vital transistor fluids flowing out of his body, for he realized now that when he landed he impaled himself on a sharp rock. "Prime!" Magnus went into stasis lock. His sensors blacked out, but like the dust storm that had blocked his senses, the sounds of the laser fire and war began to die down into the peace which the Autobots have been trying to regain for so long. Chapter 1. A cool breeze swayed across the plains, and with it 3 birds flew with the wind. They swooped over a metallic building. It was hidden among the trees in the mountains, but from up where the birds were, you could not see it. This was Autobot headquarters on planet Earth. After the destruction of their numerous bases by the Decepticons, smaller and distant bases were their new option. "Man, I miss Metroplex," sighed Mirage as he walked out of the base. He transformed and raced away towards the mountaintops. The sun shined on Mirage's chassis as he sped up. On the top of the mountain which he was racing to was Cliffjumper. He had been scanning different airwaves for some good music. Without his old friends Jazz and Blaster by his side, he kinda missed the loud rock music blasting out of them. "I'm afraid you won't get much here, but easy country listening in these parts, Jumper, old pal," said Mirage as he transformed and walked over to him. "I wasn't doing that. I was trying to hear anything about Decepticon attacks that Teletran 4 might have not picked up," replied Cliffjumper. He was too headstrong and full of pride to admit what he was really doing. Mirage sat down next to Cliffjumper. "I know you miss Jazz, but this new team system that Hound and Optimus thought up has helped us greatly," said Mirage. Then a message on Mirage's communicator came up. Mirage opened it. It was Perceptor. Mirage! Cliffjumper! I need you two back to headquarters. We are receiving a message from Cybertron. Perceptor logged out. Mirage and Cliffjumper looked at each other. Cybertron? How? Said both of them. They transformed and sped off back to headquarters. At Autobot headquarters, Ultra Magnus was pacing the floor. The memories of the battle on Delanus were running through his head. Perceptor walked into the room. He saw that Magnus was troubled. We have the right connection now, said Perceptor. Ultra Magnus looked at him like he had been in another world. Ah, Perceptor. Good. Right patch it through, replied Ultra Magnus. He shook his head and went to the computer. Mirage and Cliffjumper walked into the room as the connection was being set up. You two are late, said Magnus sternly. Hey, what about Rodimus? Where's that Autobot? Said Cliffjumper. Rodimus is on a mission, replied Ultra Magnus. Dumb kid thinks that changing his name to Rodimus makes him bet. Mirage interrupted Cliffjumper by covering his mouth. Quiet, Cliffjumper. This is important. The communication screen opened up. It was Jetfire. He had been sent to Cybertron to research the stability of the planet since its overload of plasma energy. The planet itself had become a more deadly force to Autobots than the Decepticons. Greetings. I am on Cybertron now. It seems too fine. Our plan to wait for the energy to finally stabilize is working. But still, it seems that another group has landed on the planet, reported Jetfire. What other group? I didn't think the replied Ultra Magnus. They are not Decepticons. They're... Jetfire interrupted. Then the transmission's visual link was cut. All the Autobots could hear was laser fire, but all they could see was static. Then the transmission cut entirely. Ultra Magnus turned around to the other Autobots. He knew that Jetfire was gone now. He had planned on going with him, but he was needed on Earth. Once again, he felt like he had failed. Perceptor tried to connect to Jetfire again, but there was no response. Then on the secondary tracking monitor, Perceptor saw that Jetfire's homing beacon was still active. Ultra Magnus! Jetfire is still alive! Remarked Perceptor happily. What? We have to send a team to Cybertron, blurted out Cliffjumper. Ultra Magnus looked at him. He shook his head. Cliffjumper, we know that we can't do that at this moment in time, said Ultra Magnus with a sad tone. Right, prolonged Cliffjumper. That order from the EDC that we have to stay here and help. Well, Magnus, I may not be commander, but I know when one of my buddies needs help. If well, he isn't, and I am in command. Don't throw your feelings of friendship at me, Cliffjumper. I, too, feel the same way. But we do not have the power or forces to go to Cybertron, interrupted Ultra Magnus. He knew what Cliffjumper was saying was right, but he could not afford to lose another soldier in this war. Then suddenly the Decepticon warning signal came up on the screen. It was an emergency call from Auto Base 2 in Nevada. Hound came up on the screen. Ultra Magnus, Perceptor, we need reinforcements here. Quickly, The screen went blank. Ultra Magnus turned to the other Autobots. Knew what he must do. He could not save Jetfire, but he could save his fellow Autobots closer to home. Magnus stretched out his arm and yelled, Autobots, roll out! And that is the end of the story by Jakeman. If you'd like to hear your story read on the show, please post it in the War Stories forum on tfwire.com. After doing that, all you have to do is give us permission to use it in a future podcast. And please, anyone who would like to write a story, please go ahead and submit it. We're actually running out of a little bit of stories, so we kind of need some more for future episodes. So if you know anyone that would like to hear their story read on the air, or if you know anyone who would like to submit it, or hasn't heard about War Stories yet, please tune them into tfwire.com. And until next time, This is Steven/Megatron, signing off.
The preceding story was not endorsed by Hasbro and is meant for entertainment purposes only. All fanfiction stories are copyrighted to their respective authors, and all fanfiction stories used within this podcast are used with permission from the author. This has been a TFWire.com production.